Today we're going to be talking about one of those hot topics around the country about our job as a withholding agent, and about Social Security numbers and EINs and I-10s and the new reporting rules on non-resident aliens. So as we begin today and we walk through our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about the SS5 form and the W7 and SS4, how our customers obtain tax ID numbers, and then we'll talk about the W9 and the W8 bin and our certification process. And then the forms that we use to report interest, of course, the 1099 INT, the 1042S primarily is what we want to focus on, the new one. And then what to do when your tax ID numbers don't match. And of course, that's the worst scenario, because what we want to be in the situation of is what I call preventative care. We want to make sure that the name's set up and they match, and we have a good procedure for opening accounts and deposit relationships so that we don't end up with mismatches. I was talking to a bank the other day, and she was telling me that she had gotten her fines down to $8,000 this last year. And I don't know about you, and I'm sure she was horrified too. I would hate to go tell my president of my credit union or bank or savings and loan that I hadn't gotten my fines down to $8,000. I can just picture the response to that in our industry. So we have this job as a withholding agent, and I think what's happened, and maybe this process of coming to terms with customer identification programs and also coming to terms with our job as a withholding agent has caused us some problems, but I'm really thinking it shouldn't have. It really should be a good marriage, that each system should support the other, and it shouldn't be a case of people deciding that they are going to use tax name over legal name, and what does that mean anyway, because a person only has one name. So as we begin this journey today, talking about these forms and the reporting and how we open accounts, to avoid this problem at the end and to make sure we understand people's tax statuses properly, then hopefully when we get our next CP 2100, there won't be any names on it, and there won't be the issues that we need to resolve. So that's going to be our journey today, and kind of talking about this together as an industry and how to resolve those issues. So we know as a financial institution, we have this job as a withholding agent because we make payments of interest to our account holders. So part of our job right up front is to have them certify their correct tax identification number. And so this is really important. Of course, some people are exempt from this, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Although even those that exempt, we usually have them at least sign certifying tax ID number. And so that's been helpful, I think, to the industry as a whole. But when we talk then about your customer using a Social Security number or an EIN or an I-10, all three of these are considered taxpayer identification numbers or TIN numbers. Sometimes I think people will say TIN when they mean EIN, but we're going to look at all three of these as taxpayer identification numbers: a Social Security number, an employer identification number, and an individual taxpayer identification number. By the way, the I-10 is typically issued to non-resident aliens, of course, who have a tax purpose to in the United States, like they have an interest-bearing account. So initially, and I always hate building these flow charts like this as far as when our customer will use what, because, and the big disclaimer that I'll make here while you look at this flow chart is that it is fluid, that people might be a non-resident alien. You might have account holders who are non-resident aliens who become resident aliens who become U.S. citizens, and you may have resident aliens that go back to a non-resident alien status. So just kind of loosely using this kind of as a guideline is what could happen initially, is that we can have individuals, U.S. citizens and resident aliens, and also non-resident aliens with employment authorization who apply for a Social Security number with that SS-5 form. And, of course, our U.S. citizens and resident aliens are going to sign a W-9, and our non-resident aliens are going to sign a W-8. You also are going to have people who get EIN numbers. And some of the issues we've had around the country have been things like opening nonprofit organization in a person's name and Social Security number. But, of course, that should match. But the EIN number is used for entities, estates, irrevocable trust, and businesses. And, of course, even sole proprietors might have an EIN number, but the EIN number would be assigned to the person and not to the business. And then the I-10, which has traditionally started with a 9, although I'm hearing the rumor that that's being scrambled now, but traditionally has started with a 9, and it's for account holders who are non-resident aliens, at least initially, and they have a tax purpose, meaning that they have an interest-bearing account, and those should sign the W-8 bin. Now, what we're talking about today, of course, is interest-bearing accounts. But anytime I've been in to do training, a lot of times for banks and credit unions around the country, what I hear is that we use the same procedure for our non-interest-bearing customers also, meaning we have them sign this document at the same time because we want one procedure. And again, whatever, but just remember, if you're doing that, it's really here, today's topic is more about our job as a withholding agent, which has to do with interest-bearing accounts, and those are the rules that we have to follow. So for CIP purposes, Customer Identification Program, remember this came out in the U.S. Patriot Act, Section 326, and in the Patriot Act, we had to identify our customers, and we had to maintain, records on them, and we had to consult the list of terrorists. So with CIP, it says that for U.S. persons, a financial institution must obtain a U.S. tax ID number, which would be a Social Security individual tax ID number or an employer identification number. So when you open an account for CIP purposes under the Bank Secrecy Act, you have to get name, address, date of birth, and tax ID number. Well, if there is a date of birth, of course, because it could be a corporation. But just remember that if it is a non-resident alien, you can use a passport or passport ID number. That's what national ID number. That's what CIP says. So sometimes this gets to be, a tricky winding road when we're looking at these two things and trying to match the name on the driver's license to the name on the Social Security card when you're opening accounts. And those issues need to be resolved, hopefully, before you open the account and not and not going by one name over another. That disturbs me in so many levels when I hear it. So, we going by this name, not that name. No, I can just hear my little banker saying something like that. And I'm like, okay, well, you're going to get fined on one side or the other. How about that we actually resolve how this applies? If there's a name mismatch, we're now up to $100. Those fines went up in 2011, I believe. And, of course, on the Bank Secrecy Act, you're talking about more substantial fines for violations of the Bank Secrecy Act. So you want to be very careful with making those kinds of decisions. What we want to do is resolve this with the customer. What is their name and how is their tax record done, so that we make sure that we match their government-issued ID and that it matches their tax file. And that's our job. That's what we're trying to do, basically, as a withholding agent, so that we can report properly to the IRS any payments that have been made. So as we, again, remember that CIP does not say we have to have a tax ID number on our non-resident aliens. It actually allows us to use other numbers, but I have heard repeatedly, and I'm not saying it's one way or the other, right or wrong, but a lot of people have required now to get tax ID numbers on their non-resident aliens on interest-bearing accounts, or they put them in a DDA account that's not interest-bearing. And that's certainly one option and the way to go. Because, again, as you start to look at this, it just gets more and more complex as we start to get to the new rules on non-resident alien reporting and keeping up our W-8 bins and keeping them in compliance. So the W-9, though, and that's sort of the easy part in some ways, it's usually built into our signature card contracts.